Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Lieutenant Gregor Watson. We warmly welcome the family of Private Stanley Francis Walker, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Please sit if you can do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Stanley Francis Walker. Stanley Francis Walker was born in Stawell in the Wimmera region of Victoria on the 17th of March 1925 to William and Ruby Walker. His father had served in the First World War in the 21st Battalion. Stanley attended Ararat High School. The family was living in Ararat when the Second World War broke out. Stanley was 14 years old, working as a bread carter. As his elder brothers, William and Henry, turned 21, they enlisted and served with the infantry. Stanley was allowed to enlist in the militia in April 1943 when he turned 18 and went to an infantry training battalion, first at Watsonia, then in Cowra, New South Wales. In 1943, he was granted 2 months' leave without pay to go cane cutting. By February of the following year, Stanley was able to transfer to the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, and at the end of May 1944, he arrived at the Infantry Training Centre in Canberra, southeastern Queensland. After completing his training, he was assigned to the 2nd 31st Battalion. The 2nd 31st belonged to the 7th Division and over the past years had seen some hard fighting, particularly in Syria, then Papua, then New Guinea. After its last campaign in the Ramu Valley and Finisterre Ranges of New Guinea, the 2nd 31st had returned to Australia to rest, refit and retrain. Arriving home in February 1944, the battalion moved to a camp at Strathpine, north of Brisbane. It was here that Stanley finally joined them on the 1st of August 1944. A week later, the battalion was turned out, proudly marching through the streets of Brisbane, cheered on by a crowd estimated at 250,000 people. Soon after the parade, along with many other battalions, the 2nd 31st moved north to the Atherton Tablelands for further training. In October 1944, it began training in Cairns for amphibious landings. The intensity and scale of the training increased with full divisional size exercises with live firing. Some were wounded and even killed in these rehearsals. In June 1945, after more than a year at home, the 2nd 31st returned to the war. On the 9th of June, it sailed from Townsville to Morotai Island in the northern Moluccas, where a vast invasion fleet was assembling. This would be the biggest seaborne invasion the Australians had taken part in since Gallipoli, and their largest of this war. Codenamed Operation Oboe II, it would involve 100 ships and over 30,000 Allied troops, mostly Australian. The objective was the town of Balikpapan on the southeastern corner of Borneo. With one of the largest oil refining facilities in the region, a good deep water port and airfields, Balikpapan was clearly of value. The Japanese had held it for years and fortified it strongly. After days of bombardment by sea and air, at 9 in the morning on the 2nd of July, the second day of the invasion, the 2nd 31st Battalion landed on Green Beach. After establishing control in its sector, patrols were sent out to scout the area and probe for enemy resistance ahead of the following day's push. Next morning, the 3rd of July, the battalion set out northwards. Its objectives were about 1 kilometre inland, several low features among rough terrain with thick undergrowth. As the men advanced, enemy opposition grew stiffer and the battalion began taking casualties, mainly from isolated Japanese machine gun posts and snipers. The Australians took all their objectives but had to fight off several desperate Japanese counterattacks. Stanley's D Company took a feature named Nurse, a small but steep hill covered with very dense undergrowth, but were later forced off. The day had been mostly successful, but casualties were heavy. The 2nd 31st lost 13 killed and 37 wounded that day. Among the dead was Stanley Walker. He was buried the next day at the junction of Valley and Chiltern Roads. His remains were later reburied at a larger cemetery near Balikpapan, before finally being laid to rest at Labwan War Cemetery under the inscription, "His duty nobly done." He was 20 years old. His name is listed on the roll of honour to my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Stanley Francis Walker, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.